Alright, great students, I hope you guys are doing well. Just due to the lack of content on YouTube, I couldn't find exactly what I wanted to show you, so I'm going to be doing a short summary regarding investigating design issues for technology. We're going to be looking at structural elements, namely the beam, struts, ties. We're going to touch on membranes and then look at reinforcing techniques with regards to stability and the center of gravity. Alright, so we'll start off with beams. Your main forms of beams come in a I-beam, a L or angle-shaped beam, a T-beam, a rod, which is now a solid beam, which is now different from a tube, okay, which is hollow inside, and then you also get a square tube. These are your six different types of beams. Their purpose is to resist bending. So if we had a beam and we had to put compressive force on top of the beam, it needs to resist bending. So think of like when you're sitting on a bench, you don't want that bench to bend. And it's an example of beams going across the bench in order to support your body on top of the bench. If, however, it does start to bend, there are a few techniques we can use to strengthen a beam that is about to bend. So an example, if you had a wall and a beam that was supporting a pot plant, and we didn't want this pot plant to fall, the first thing that we could do is add a strut. So by adding a strut, this would be the strut over here, it resists compressive force and prevents our flower pot from falling and the beam from breaking or bending or toppling over. The second example being a tie with the same scenario. The only difference being a tie will resist tension force and it will be installed over here to resist the beam from falling away or toppling over. Okay, so again to revise, a strut resists compressive force pushing down, a tie will resist tension force, and that's a pulling away force to keep the pot plant stable and not allow for it to fall. Okay, the next thing being membranes. So you learned already about the different types of structures, namely the shell, frame and solid. A membrane applies to a frame structure. Okay, so if we had, say for example, a tent, it's just a rough drawing. Let's say this was the frame of our tent, okay, and now we needed a canvas to go over to keep us safe from the weather and the rain, etc. The canvas that covers the tent is referred to as the membrane. Okay, sometimes membranes can be used to add strength, alright, other times it's just there to resist certain elements. Another example would be a roof, where you have a roof truss that would be your frame structure that holds up either the steel sheets that you have on your roof, or if you have tiles, it would hold up the tiles. Okay, the next thing being stability. Now when we look at stability, we need to look at the center of gravity as well as how wide is the base. So if we had a cell phone tower, an example of a cell phone tower that had, say, frame structures and, say, struts inside and ties, etc. Okay, this is just a rough example. Okay, so let's say this was our cell phone tower. The wider the base, the more stable the cell phone tower will be. So think about when you're standing. If you're standing with your feet together, you're going to be a lot less stable. It'll be easier for someone to push you over compared to if you were standing with your feet shoulder width apart. Then you're a lot more stable because you're increasing the base in which you are secured. Alright, the other part that plays a role is the center of gravity. So the center of gravity is the midline. So basically it's a force acting on top of a structure. So this is the cell phone tower's center of gravity. Now if this cell phone tower were to start to topple over, the center of gravity would stay exactly the same. Alright, and just as if you're standing on one leg and you start leaning to the side, eventually you are going to fall and you're going to have to put your other leg down. That's because you have passed the center of gravity and you are now no longer stable. So let me just repeat that. If you're standing on one leg, so my stick man just has one leg here, alright, and he's a pretty happy guy today. If he's standing on one leg and he starts to drift across, when he comes away from this center of gravity, so this being the center of gravity, when he comes away from this, he will have to put the other leg down in order to stay stable, otherwise he would fall over. The same goes for if you're bending down to pick something up off the ground. As soon as you bend, you are now off the center of gravity and you're a lot more vulnerable to toppling over if someone were to bash into you or knock into you. Okay, so and I'll explain this more in detail when I see you again to give you a better idea of what the center of gravity is. what you're going to be doing is for activity 4.10, you're going to test your own center of gravity, where you can work with a sibling or mom and dad, and then you can just test those few things out when you're standing shoulder width apart, bend over, etc., and see where are you the most stable, and act upon that center of gravity. Just to add on to that, what you can do is you can stand with your feet together and start leaning forward until eventually you have to take a step, and there you'll see where your center of gravity has now been passed, and then you had to obviously take a step to stay stable. Alright, grade 7s, you just have to please keep up the hard work. You're doing an awesome job. I hope to see you guys soon as this coronavirus is under control, and I'm just waiting to hear the exact date of when I'll be seeing you again. So just keep up the good work.